Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel. Get ready for heart-touching stories. Don't forget to subscribe and let's begin.
The summer I turned 12 was the summer I learned that some jokes aren't funny, that pride can carry you further than a bus ticket, and that the people who underestimate you are often the ones standing closest. It started on a Tuesday in July, which is, objectively, the worst possible day for your life to fall apart. Not a dramatic Monday, not a melancholy Sunday. A Tuesday, the most forgettable day of the week, at Millhaven Central Station, where the pigeons were fat and indifferent and the PA system crackled like an old man clearing his throat. We had been visiting Aunt Renata for the long weekend. Aunt Renata lived in Carlo, 3 towns over from our own, and she had a house that smelled like lavender and old magazines and a cat named Biscuit who hated everyone equally. The visit had been fine, the way most family visits are fine, tolerable on the surface, quietly exhausting beneath it. Mom and Aunt Renata had spent most of the weekend laughing at things I didn't understand, drinking wine with ice in it, and occasionally glancing at me the way adults glance at furniture they're not sure matches the room. I was the quiet kid. I want to be honest about that. I was the kid who read during car rides and asked too many questions about things nobody else found interesting: train schedules, city maps, the migratory patterns of birds. Mom used to say I lived inside my own head like it was a one-bedroom apartment I'd never bothered to decorate. She didn't mean it cruelly. That's the thing about her, she never meant anything cruelly. She just meant things carelessly, which, depending on the day, felt like the same thing. We were at the station because my older cousin Marcus had a train to catch back to university. The whole family had come to see him off: Mom, Aunt Renata, Uncle Pete, and me, trailing slightly behind the way I always did, dragging my duffel bag with the broken zipper. The station was busy with the particular chaos of a summer afternoon. Families with strollers, backpackers with impractical luggage, an old man in a yellow hat reading a newspaper from 3 days ago. Marcus's train was announced. There was a flurry of hugging and last-minute advice from Uncle Pete about eating real food and calling his mother. I stood near the bench, watching the way I always watched things, carefully, a little removed, as though I was already writing the memory down somewhere in my mind, and then something happened. Or rather, something was said. I had wandered maybe 20 feet away to read the departures board because the departures board was, to me, a kind of poetry. All those places lined up in neat rows, all those times, all that possibility arranged in alphabetical order. I was reading it when I heard my mother's voice, bright and laughing, cutting through the station noise. "Watch this," she said. I turned. She was looking at me with that particular expression she sometimes wore, the one that meant she'd thought of something she found funnier than I was going to. Aunt Renata was beside her, hand over her mouth, already giggling. Uncle Pete was shaking his head but smiling. "We're going to get the car," Mom called to me. "Back in 2 minutes." I nodded. I turned back to the board. I read about a train leaving for Whitmore at 4:47 and imagined briefly what it would be like to be on it. 2 minutes passed, then 5, then 10. I looked around. The bench where we'd been standing was empty. The space where my family had occupied the afternoon was as clean and unbothered as if they'd never been there at all. I walked to the entrance. I walked to the parking area. I walked back inside slowly with the specific calmness of someone who hasn't yet decided whether to panic. The car was gone. My mother was gone. I was 12 years old, alone at Millhaven Central Station, with $4.30 in my pocket, a broken duffel bag, and the sudden clarifying awareness that I had absolutely no idea what to do next. I found out later, much later, when the whole thing had been repackaged as a hilarious family story, that it had started as a dare. Aunt Renata had once left her own son Marcus at a grocery store for 5 minutes when he was 9, just to see what he'd do. He'd apparently gone directly to the customer service desk and asked them to page her. They'd all found it very funny. The story had grown in the retelling, the way family stories do, until it had become a kind of legend. Marcus, unflappable at 9, handling things like a small adult. I was not, in the family's estimation, that kind of kid. I was the dreamy one, the reader, the one who got lost in his own neighborhood because he was looking at the clouds. The running bet, and I mean this literally, there was an actual bet, $20 between my mother and Grandpa Lou, was about whether I would simply stand in the station and wait for someone to come back or whether I would figure it out on my own. Grandpa Lou, bless him, had bet against me. "He'll stand there like a post," he'd apparently said when Mom had called him from the car, still laughing. "Sweet kid, but no initiative. $20 says he doesn't move an inch." My mother, feeling a complicated mixture of maternal loyalty and genuine uncertainty, had taken the bet. They parked around the corner. They waited, what they expected, me standing by the bench staring at the departures board, waiting patiently for rescue like a lost umbrella. What they got was something else entirely. The first thing I did once I was sure, truly, completely sure that they were gone, was sit down on the bench and take stock. This is something I'd read in a survival book once, one of those wilderness guides that I'd checked out from the library for no particular reason other than it seemed useful to know things. The book said, "Before you act, assess, know what you have, know where you are, know what you need." What I had: $4.30. Broken duffel bag containing 2 changes of clothes, a library book about migratory birds, a half-eaten granola bar, and my mother's old phone, a brick of a thing she'd given me for emergencies, prepaid with maybe $12 of credit on it. What I knew, I was at Millhaven Central. Home was Deerfield, which I was fairly sure was either east or northeast of Millhaven. We drove it in about 40 minutes. The train, if there was one, would be faster. What I needed, to get home without crying, without asking a stranger for help in a way that felt helpless, and increasingly without giving Grandpa Lou the satisfaction. I didn't know about the bet yet, but I knew my family. I knew the way they looked at me, sometimes fond and slightly pitying, like you look at a goldfish that keeps bumping into the glass. I had the specific sharp feeling of a kid who has something to prove, even if he can't quite name what it is yet. I went to the departures board. There was a train to Deerfield, platform 6, departing at 5:22. It was currently 4:38. I went to the ticket window. One to Deerfield, I said. The man behind the glass looked at me the way adults look at unaccompanied children, that brief, calculating assessment. That's 6:50, he said. I had 4:30. Is there a cheaper option? I asked. Like a youth fair or something? He looked at me again. You traveling alone? My mom's in the parking lot, I said, which was technically true in the sense that the parking lot was somewhere in the vicinity and my mother was somewhere in the world. She sent me to get the tickets. He typed something. Child fare is 5 even. I had 4:30. I thanked him and walked away. I sat back on the bench. I ate the granola bar. I thought, the emergency phone. I turned it over in my hands. I could call Mom. That was the obvious answer. That was the goldfish bumping into glass answer. I put the phone in my pocket. I thought about the 70 cents I was short. I thought about the granola bar wrapper in my hand. I thought about the departures board and the 5:22 train and the 44 minutes I had left. Then I walked to the small newsstand near the entrance where an elderly woman was buying a crossword puzzle magazine. Excuse me, I said. I'm trying to get home to Deerfield and I'm 70 cents short for the train ticket. I have $4.30. Is there anything I could help you with for 70 cents? Carry something, or? She looked at me for a long moment. She had the kind of face that had seen a great many things and found most of them only mildly surprising. Can you do crosswords? She asked. Pretty good at them, I said. This was true. Grandpa Lou had taught me. 7 across, she said, opening the magazine right there. 11 letters, Navigator's Reckoning. Thought for about 4 seconds. Dead reckoning, I said. Deity. She smiled, reached into her purse, handed me $1. Keep the change, she said. I had $5.30. I bought the child fare ticket. I had 30 cents left, which I held in my palm like a small, absurd trophy. Platform 6 smelled like diesel and summer heat. I found a seat by the window. The train filled around me, commuters, a young couple with matching backpacks, a man in a business suit eating a sandwich with the focused urgency of someone who hadn't eaten all day. I watched the station slide away as the train pulled out, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Not triumph exactly, not yet, something quieter, something that felt, for the first time in my 12 years, like competence. The train ride was 23 minutes, I know because I timed it. Deerfield Station was smaller than Millhaven, just 2 platforms and a ticket booth that closed at 6. I walked out into the late afternoon light and got my bearings. Our house was about 2 miles away. I knew the route because I'd walked pieces of it before, and because I was, as previously established, the kind of kid who paid attention to things like that. I walked. It took 35 minutes. My duffel bag dug into my shoulder. A dog barked at me from behind a fence on Maple Street. I stepped around a sprinkler on Orchard Avenue. I thought about the crossword woman and hoped she'd finished her puzzle. I thought about the departures board and all those places lined up in rows. I thought with a distant academic curiosity about what my mother was doing right now. I turned onto our street at 6:17 in the evening. The car was in the driveway. I could see, through the front window, the pale blue flicker of the television. I stood at the end of the driveway for a moment, duffel bag on my shoulder, 30 cents in my pocket, 2 miles of summer evening still warm in my legs. Then I walked to the front door and opened it. The silence that greeted me was one of the most satisfying sounds I have ever heard. Mom was on the couch. Aunt Renata, who had apparently come back with her, was in the armchair. Uncle Pete stood in the kitchen doorway. The television was on, but nobody was watching it. They had the careful, slightly guilty stillness of people who have been waiting and have only just realized very recently that waiting might last longer than they'd planned. My mother stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her tea. Oh, thank God, she said, and the laugh that came with it was thinner than her usual laugh, not quite as certain of itself. Hi, I said. We thought. Aunt Renata started. You were supposed to, Uncle Pete tried. Where have you been? Mom said. And then, catching herself, quieter, are you okay? I'm fine, I said. I took the 5:22 from Millhaven. Child fare is $5. I set my duffel bag down. You owe Grandpa Lou $20, by the way. Room went very still. Did you? Mom started. I heard you on the phone with him before you left, I said. This was a lie. I hadn't heard anything. I'd figured it out from the way she was looking at me now, that particular combination of surprise and something that might have been shame. I'm not sure why I lied. Maybe because it seemed important for her to know that I wasn't as unobservant as they thought. Maybe because the truth, that I'd reasoned my way to the conclusion from nothing but her expression, was actually more impressive. And I was, at 12, already learning the art of letting people underestimate you just enough. Mom sat back down. She looked at her hands for a moment. I'm sorry, she said, and this time the laugh was completely gone. That was stupid of me. I thought you'd just call and we'd come right back and you had my number blocked, I said. This was also a guess, but the way her face crumpled told me I was right. It was supposed to be a joke, Aunt Renata said quietly. I know, I said. It's fine. It wasn't entirely fine, but it would be. That's the thing about being 12, you're old enough to understand that people are complicated and young enough to still let them try again. Grandpa Lou called that night. Mom handed me the phone with a look on her face I'd never quite seen before, something between embarrassment and respect. I hear I owe your mother $20, he said. You do, I said, a pause. Then that big warm laugh of his, the one that sounded like furniture being moved. Good boy, he said. Good boy. You know I was rooting for you, don't you? That's not what Mom said. Your mother, he said, still laughing, doesn't always know what I'm doing. I thought about that for a long time afterward. About Grandpa Lou, who had taught me crosswords and given me his old train maps and never once told me to get my nose out of a book. About bets and the people who place them and what it means to root for someone by pretending you don't. The $20 when Mom paid it came back to me. Grandpa Lou handed it over the next Sunday at dinner, folded into a small square pressed into my palm like a secret. Navigation money, he whispered, for next time. I kept it in my wallet for 3 years without spending it. Some things are worth more than what they cost.